Chapter 78, Remembrance I. When the warden flew off, Krilla's vision suddenly darkened. She thought maybe she was slipping into the dark place, the place where people all went when they died, but no, that was not it. She could still see the lightstone crystals and their shine above. They were just dimmer because the warden's own light had been just that bright. Krilla breathed again. Her body always seized up whenever the warden came near her. At first, when she first went into the tower with the shiny men and the shining warden, it had not been like that, but after the hurt, thousands and thousands of times hurting whenever he came near, whenever he spoke, her body just ended up like this when he was here. Worthless. Useless. Those two words had been engraved into her body and mind over and over and over again, and even though the pain, she got used to with some time, those words, she never did. Even now, she was frozen up. She could not move. She could almost feel the blood pooling out from her hand and her foot, and she knew soon, her body would grow cold, and she would go to the dark place, but even then, she could not move. But she had to. Unlike her, that one was not useless. Or worthless. Unlike her, that one was not meant to exist only to bring misery and pain and suffering to everyone else. She called him that one because she knew in spending time with him that he did not like to be called a monster or a beast, but he had never really told her what he was. That one was going to bring the collective where there were no more differences and hate and love that did nothing but hurt. Her vision stopped blurring. She grit her teeth and tried to roll to her side and stand up, but she only ended up on her stomach, her breathing tightened against the cold stone floor. She had no hands to lift herself up with, nor did she have the physical strength. All she could do was weakly look up and watch the warden put a hand on that one's back. A gentle touch, but she knew well more than anyone that that gentle touch, that love, would lead to pain and hurt. She roused herself up, a weak, flickering purple aura covering her body, and her small, bloody, and broken figure started to float upwards, her arms and legs dangling limp and trickling little streams of blood that pattered on the cracked stone. Almost no more mana. Nausea started to well up in her stomach, her vision shook again, but she kept going, kept floating. She neared the warden, his bright light, and she remembered the pain and hurt and froze, but she just closed her eyes and kept going. Eventually, she felt the warden's heat, and what could she do? She had no mana for Sapia. Even if she did, she could never have hurt the warden. Why was she so worthless? So useless? She hovered behind the warden, uncertain, and she knew for certain the warden knew she was there. He just did not care. He did not believe she would ever be able to raise the will to harm him. And maybe just a day ago, that would have been true. But now she had to try and fight, because even if she were worthless, that one was not, and at the very least, her worthless self could be part of something better than her. She shook her head and bit down on the warden's arm. Her teeth chipped as they tried to bite down on impossibly hard and dense flesh. "Oh, my dear, have you lost your fear?" said the warden. He stiffened up, demeanor shifting into blatant hostility as his lean muscles tensed and his masked face swiveled to face Krilla. He took his immediate attention off of that one and slapped Krilla away from his arm. She fell straight down to the ground in a crumpled heap, her cheek burst and blood pouring through her tiny teeth. She did not feel much pain, just a tiny pinprick, and she knew she was getting cold and numb and reaching the dark place. "You reject my love," said the warden as he stood over her. "After all these years accepting it. Why? Why? Tell me, why? Do you not know that my love is the only thing that gives you value? Without my love granting you exquisite taste, you are nothing. A completely worthless speck of dust that worms around in the dark where no living thing should. You think you have any worth aside from your taste? Do you? Do you not remember? Well, you came to under my embrace. You were abandoned as a child because your kind sinned against the common body and waged war. The reason your old teacher, that heretical sorcerer, was purged was because of you, and he believed in you so very much. Your greed and selfishness killed him. All you do is cause pain and misery for all around you. You have no right to exist on this world, to breathe the very same air we do. You are nothing. Do you understand me?" The warden knelt to Krilla's limp body and placed his masked face close to her ear, his hand stroking strands of dirty blood-soaked hair away from her forehead. Suddenly, he shouted in her ear. "Nothing. The sudden powerful shout sent powerful force crashing through her ears, and she felt the warmth of blood trickle out from them as her hearing completely faded. Her brain rattled and her ears whined and her body got number as she widened her eyes and gaped open her mouth, staring up only at the sunny ceiling again. In the corner of her vision, the warden shook his head at her and walked away. All her senses were taken from her. The world was soundless. Her touch was numbing. Her sight was shaking, blurring, mixing the colors and shapes in front of her all into one nauseating slurry. She closed her eyes to blink. It was hard to open them again. But that made sense. It made sense she could not even do something as simple as blinking. She was nothing. She was worthless. She knew the warden was right. He told her again and again she lived only to make others suffer and feel pain and misery, and she knew he was right, because for so long all she wanted to do was see others hurt like her. She was not good. She was not nice. She was not anything. Mother would have been disappointed in her. She was always nice, even if it was hard to remember her. Why was it, though? She would have liked to remember Mother. Even just her face. But it was so hard. All she could remember was Mother leaving her, and that was it. But she could not blame her mother. After all, she was worthless. Her existence had no meaning but to cause pain and suffering. Mother probably knew that and threw her away. Even then, she wanted to remember. 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 She remembered. __. Cruella clung tight to her mother's side as her mother flew through the air, purple trails of magical energy moving her this way and that. The air was hot. Almost burning, and Cruella went into a coughing fit, burying her face into her mother's chest. Just a little more, my dearest Moon, said Mother, her voice ever so strong and calm at the same time. Her body was warm, comfortably warm, unlike the hot air everywhere which cracked Cruella's lips and singed the tips of her hair. The flickering and crackling of fires raged everywhere below. Cruella was scared, but even then, she was still curious. She looked up. The eternal moon shone above, one half of it pale and silver and the other half drenched in angry red. Then she looked down. A vast landscape of cracked earth filled with twisting spires of stone, canyons, and rock formations that floated in haphazard patterns everywhere, defying gravity. This was Zeril, the home she had forgotten, the realm of the demons and vampires. There was fire everywhere. Cruella was high up enough where the fires looked like a red coat of shimmering hairs covering the rocky ground. Like Kerberos' fiery hair. She wondered why Mother did not take Kerberos with them. She missed him and his wagging tail and always happy eyes already. She had told him to stay in the room and that she would be back soon. She strained her eyes and found far away, almost a black dot now, the big house she lived in. A castle, people said it was. There was fire on there too. Bright lights of many different colors shone everywhere with the fire. Greens and reds and yellows and blues. Then, all of a sudden, it was like the world had turned white. Cruella saw as a huge burst of light swallowed up her home and everything around it. She closed her eyes from the blinding light. A gust of strong wind buffeted Mother, rocking Cruella, and she hunkered down, holding her mother's waist tight. Force traveled through Cruella, rattling her very bones, and she whimpered in fear. The sound of the earth rumbling made her feel uneasy, like the whole world was about collapse. When Cruella opened her eyes again, she saw the black dot of the castle again, but this time, it floated in the air atop an enormous crater larger than some of the canyons below. Another zero bomb, whispered Mother under her breath as she righted herself in the air. Cruella balled her mother's robes in her fists in worry. Mother only ever talked to herself when she needed to think hard about something important. All 7 courts disabled. 6 out of 7 dukes dead. Castle shielding down now. Only a matter of time before they get to him and the collapse begins, said Mother. Her purple eyes narrowed as her they'll, almost as long as her own body, wrapped around Cruella, holding her tight before it linked with her own they'll. How much time do I have? 3 minutes. No, 2. Have to go now, while they're distracted with him. Have to go faster. Airspace won't be free for much longer. Mother put a soft hand to Cruella's head. My Moon, hold to me tight. You might get dizzy. Where are we going, Mother? Will we come back for Kerberos? Said Cruella. Mother's body tensed up for a second, like she was thinking about something bad, before she relaxed. Mother is taking you someplace safe and far away. Kerberos. He's a good boy. He will wait for you. We can't take him now, but maybe, when you're big enough, you can come back and take him. Krilla nodded, feeling Mother's calm infuse into her through their link. Mother started to fly downwards, her wings flapping once, launching her through a series of ash clouds as she headed to the ground. Mother was fast. Very fast, to the point where Krilla could only see dizzying blurs of color and feel the wind scream and whistle around her when Mother flew. But Mother stopped abruptly soon. "Curse the gods above," muttered Mother, and Krilla looked up to see her face twisted in rage. Krilla was not afraid. Mother got angry at other people a lot, but never, ever at Krilla. She followed Mother's gaze downwards, and her eyes widened in wonder. "Wow," said Krilla in curiosity. There were so many things here she had only seen in her picture books. A huge floating ball of metal and circuits floating on tails of fiery engine exhaust. A dwarven gunship. Krilla had read about them just a bit. She was just 6, but she knew that the gunships could hold over 500 people, and that they could beat up strong monsters all by themselves. Beside it, a tree just as large floated in the air. A dozen rings of varying shining lights surrounded the tree, making it float. Krilla also knew this. It was a fairy skytree. But she had not gotten to learn about the fairies much yet. That was for next week's lesson. But what were these things all doing here, in Zeril, where nobody usually ever visited? "All flight-capable sorcerers are to be part of the aerial assault against the Demon King's castle," came a projected male voice from the gunship. Several huge barrels dotting the metal sphere groaned as they pointed to Mother and Krilla. "Identify yourself." Krilla knew these things, cannons. She remembered they were very dangerous and meant to hurt and kill monsters, so why were they aimed at her? "Mother minus," she began in worry. "Calm, my moon, calm," said Mother, and Krilla nodded, almost dozing off as calm filled her mind. Before she could feel sleep fully overtake her, she heard Mother whispering to herself. "One C-class gunship with, let's say 2 compromised engines, judging by their sputtering. One evergreen skytree with 40, no 50 fairies managing it. All of them weak." Mother nodded to herself, and Krilla caught a glimpse of her pale face under her hood before she fell asleep. Mother's mouth was bared open in a half-smile, long fangs protruding in menacing anticipation. Chapter 79, Remembrance 2. Krilla woke up in her mother's arms, and she could no longer feel the whistle of winds buffeting her. But everything was so much hotter. She coughed as she took in air that felt like it burned her insides. "Easy breaths, my moon. Calm. You are unused to the air outside the palace, and all the destruction has driven up ash and mold that has made it even worse. But you are strong, you can handle it." "Calm," said Mother. Krilla felt calm flow into her again, and she nodded. She looked down and realized they were on the ground now. She looked up at her mother's smiling, gentle face, and behind her, far in the sky, there were huge chunks of broken metal wreathed with crackling electricity and big shards of wood floating in the air. And Krilla thought she could see bodies between the debris, but before she could begin to make them out, Mother blocked her view with her face and gave her a kiss on the forehead. "We are here, my moon," said Mother, and when she drew back, there were small tears lining the sides of her amethyst eyes. "Just a little more." "A little more until what?" Krilla wanted to ask this, but she still felt so tired, and before she could rouse herself, Mother moved again. Mother floated just a little bit above the ground as she passed under an arch of rock. She put her sandaled, clawed feet down on the shadow the arch casted, atop a large growth of glowing black fungal matter, and the matter parted to reveal a deep pit. They floated down the pit, in complete and utter darkness, until Mother's body jolted as she landed on solid ground. Krilla saw in the darkness ahead a seemingly unending tunnel, but that distance shortened quickly as Mother flew forwards at high speeds. Mother stopped a minute later in front of a tall human man built wide and sturdy like a boulder. It was the very first time Krilla had ever seen a human, and she widened her eyes in wonder. He was wrapped up in robes very much like Mother's. While Mother's robes were black, the man's was brown like the dirt and speckled with a patch with 6 stars on it, matching his grizzled, dirt-caked and bearded face. Despite how scary he looked, Krilla could see his eyes were sad. Very sad as they looked down at Mother. "Thorian," said Mother with a nod as she brought Krilla down to the ground. "Say hello, little moon." Krilla nodded and waddled up to Thorian, not even reaching his knee, and bowed her head politely. "Hello," she said, feeling shy and nervous. Was this the right thing to say to humans? "She has not heard of me," said Thorian to Mother. A hint of disappointment leached into his voice. "Of course, she has. You think I wouldn't let her know about my bone-headed partner in the order? Said Mother. Those were better times, said Thorian. He knelt down and put a rough, hard hand on Krilla's head, and she recoiled backwards because it felt like a brick was scraping her head. She hid behind Mother. She's just shy. She loves new people and new things, said Mother. But she hasn't talked to anyone that doesn't look like her. It might take some time for her to adjust and talk to others, but I know you of all people can teach her that. Sometimes, I think you talk too much. Mother paused. Though I suppose we have not talked face to face in how many years is it? 10 years. Not since the Red Night, said Thorian. He shook his head and trembled, his cracked lip quivering. Mother walked forwards and embraced Thorian, patting his broad back once before pulling away. Don't go crying on me like this. It truly does not suit those muscles and looks of yours. Come now. Kalana, do you? You do not have to do this. You are a decorated sorcerer with 8 rings, one of few zeniths across all the realms. Your knowledge and power could rival the Ascended. If you explain to them like you explained to me that you were being controlled, no, that all the demons were being controlled, then would they not grant you lenience? Mother pointed to Thorian's head. Your hair is thinning and graying. Kalana, please, be serious began Thorian. That means you are old. Both of us are nearing 60, even though time may show its marks far slower on my kind, said Mother. You and I both know from experience that common life does not easily forgive and forget. The Red Knight slaughtered countless millions across all common realms. Even Etheria itself came under attack. My kind will never be forgiven. Mother sighed, but then nodded down to Krilla with a smile. But she is blameless and miraculously unmarked. And she is mine. At the very least, I want her to have a happy life resembling something normal. You can still come with me, said Thorian. That mark of yours, I swear I can find a way to erase it. Mother put a finger to her forehead, where a black crescent moon mark lay etched. The same that was on most of the important people Mother talked to back in the castle. I am a genius among geniuses, I will not shy away from acknowledging my skills, said Mother. But this, even I cannot find a means to remove. It is divine magic from a gatekeeper, there is hardly anything that can touch this. The best even I could do was sever my will partially from it so that I was no longer under the thrall of Kinthas. But it is already preordained. When Kinthas falls, so do the marked. You know this. You have always known it. I told you from the very beginning, the very first time I reached out to you to plan this a year ago. I have some sway with the Sorcerer's Order now. Kalana, I can make something work with you. With you and me, I know it, said Thorian. I am privy to the higher plannings among the Order. This full-scale invasion may seem like vengeful retaliation, and I do acknowledge there is much vengeance among the armies, but we ultimately are not here to destroy Kinthas. I am sure you have thought about this too. Kinthas is a gatekeeper. Without him managing one of the 5 origin gates, the world will fall out of balance. We are here to capture him alive, and then we are to capture at the very least one of you from the origin-touched royal bloodlines. Thorian pointed a big finger to Mother. Like you. I can have them keep you alive. You daughter, too, and then we can remove the mark. Thorian, you know this is idiotic, said Mother. Her words were harsh, but her tone was soft. Kinthas is king of demons, lord of the 7 courts. Gatekeeper of chaos, and wielder of Duskfall. And he is completely and utterly insane. You think he will ever submit willingly? You think the common realms can afford to try to keep him alive? 5 realms. 5 worlds worth of military might. The full might of the Sorcerer's Order with 11 zeniths among them. The Adventurers League including the vast majority of their 7 to 10 star adventurers. The Ascended. And even the 8 of the avatars from the 12 gods of the Protectorate. All of this against Kinthas in his full manifest with the curse of Undeath fueling him. Mother shrugged. The odds are 5 to 1 in favor of Kinthas, I should say. Solarian is with us, said Thorian. And he is also in his full manifest. Wielding also the Donrais. With the shielding around the castle down, Solarian should now be making his move. We have time, Kalana, time to decide. Chapter 80, Remembrance 3. Then the odds are simply even, said Mother. Tell me, Thorian, say that Kinthas is captured and restrained. Say that Krilla and I do come under the common authority. What happens then? My people have already been excised from the common body. We may as well be monsters. We will be slowly exterminated. They may treat me with dignity, but in the end, I will become nothing more than breeding stock, popping out more origin bearers capable of taking Kinthus's place as gatekeeper. And you know Etheria will make sure that any new gatekeeper of chaos will now be groomed and controlled such that they will never rebel again. Or ever think for themselves. And who do you think would be the most suitable gatekeeper? The most innocent mind to mold. Mother looked down to Krola and shook her head. Krola will have any choice in her life completely stripped from her as the gods force her to be nothing more than a battery for their games. Is this truly what you desire for us? No, it is not. Thorian grit his teeth and shook his head. He slammed his fist against the tunnel wall in frustration, shattering the rock clean. I just want you to live, Kalana. I just want you to live. That is all I have ever wanted. I should never have let you go back to Zerl. I should have told you how I felt back then, and I should have kept you with me. You know that would not have worked between us, said Mother. She put a hand to Thorian's roughened cheek, and the large man leaned into the touch with closed eyes. Krola stood by her mother's legs, ever more confused, unable to process what she was hearing. She had not the slightest clue what they talked about, only that it was very serious, and by the emotions she could feel from Mother, she could feel a pit forming in her stomach as she expected something bad to happen. A sudden crash. Light filled the tunnel behind them, and Krola leapt behind Mother. Mother turned around, fangs bared and eyes alight with power. Thorian too tensed up and balled his great fists. Under a pile of falling rubble, a shining man knelt. He had the helmet and legwear of a knight, but the rest of his muscled and scarred body was bare. 6 golden wings of energy shone from his sides as he stood up. Around his heart was a golden 9-pointed sun sigil with the numeral IV imprinted within it. Survivors, said the shining man. He spoke with enthusiasm, leeching his every word. But you will live no more. For it is I, Ixauzia, come to bring the light of justice to you all. The shining man struck a pose, flexing his muscles as he stood up ramrod straight and thrust his arms to the sky. Mother did not waste time. She put one hand forwards, and then the other until both hands touched together. They flashed purple. Ultima Force 1, Infinity, she chanted. Space distorted around the shining man's chest, and in an instant, he was gone, pushed away until he reached the end of the tunnel, and then he smashed through even further, his brawny figure used as a battering ram to drill through solid rock. Krola did not even have the time to blink before the man was completely gone. The hole he had drilled through was outlined with shining, heatwave-curled molten orange. That should send him out close to the upper atmosphere, said Mother with a deep sigh, her hands trembling from slight exertion. But he is an upper ray. That alone will not do him in. He will be back. An upper ray. Thorian blinked. How did he know we were even here? Likely chance, said Mother. You said it yourself. Solarian is here with his full manifest. A battle between 2 full manifest gatekeepers is so far beyond the scope of anything below that all the other forces probably withdrew, the rays included. Likely to pick off any survivors or runners. And what better place to target than one with active warp energy readings? I placed several warp crystals as decoys throughout the realm, but the rays are fast. And it looks like we got unlucky. Mother turned to Thorian. You stand no chance against Ray 4 or even any of the lower rays. You cannot be spotted again, either, lest you be executed for consorting with us. There is no more time now. The warp crystal I hid is at the end of the tunnel. One-time use, so you do not have to worry about anyone following. Go, Thorian, and take her. Thorian nodded with urgency and knelt down, reaching his big hand out to Krola. Krola shrunk away, scared. Thorian stopped and shook his head as he saw Krola's fear. I don't know if I can do this, Kalana. I have never raised a child before. Without you, I can't minus. Mother put a hand on Thorian's shoulder. Of all the things to worry about now, you choose your potential parenting skills. Mother smiled. You have a good heart, Thorian. That is all you need. And you will not be alone. I will be with you. Mother knelt to Krola's level and picked her up. Because some part of me will always be with her. Krola watched in panic as Mother held her out to Thorian, and she clung to her mother's arms, grabbing her robes right. Calm, little moon, calm, said Mother, and Krola felt calm. But the moment Thorian took her in his large, rough and uncomfortable arms, she began to panic again. Where am I going? Mother, I don't want to go. Not with him. Krola squirmed in Thorian's hands, kicking his brick-like chest to no avail. Hush, child. Your mother is right. We must go, said Thorian as he started to move away from Mother, but Krilla kept squirming as she stared at Mother's receding back. Why? Did I do something wrong? Is there something wrong with me? Mother, I promise I'll fix it. I'll be good, I promise. Mother turned around again and came to Krilla's side, and for a moment Krilla was hopeful. You are going to use primordial magic, said Thorian as he looked down to Mother's arms. Both her arms were covered in shadowy, flickering lines. To kill an upper ray, I must. And I might as well use chaos before the gate closes or gets taken over, said Mother. She put a hand to Krilla's cheek. My little moon, there is nothing wrong with you. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise, said Mother. She put her thumb to Krilla's, and Krilla felt calm and sleepiness wash over her. Mother has to go now, and I wish I could be there for you. I do with all my heart and all my love, but I have to stay. Thorian will take care of you. Make sure to listen to him. He will be good to you, that, I can promise. And look, Mother raised her arms up to Krilla's dozing eyes. She looked at the pretty pattern of shadowy lines running up and down her pale skin. You have these too. We are born with it. This is proof you are special. Born special and destined for greatness. When you get big like me, you will be strong, I know it. For now, Mother will be putting you to sleep and sealing your memories, but that is not because Mother hates you. It is because Mother knows you love her very much, and that if you keep remembering her, it will only hurt more. It will also seal your power and keep you hidden from bad people. When you get older, my little moon, when you are ready, that power will be yours again, and by staying here, I want to give you the opportunity to have a choice in how you use it. When the time comes you do remember me, I hope you will find it in your heart to forgive me. Krilla could barely hear her mother at this point, and before she dozed off into complete sleep, she felt Mother's warm lips on her forehead. Goodbye. Chapter 81, The Choice to Fight. Krilla coughed as her eyes opened again, her squared black pupils widening nearly to circles. She remembered. The strongest thing she felt right now was the memory of her mother's warm hold, and that was enough to push away the numbness and cold that had creeped into her. She could feel her body again, feel her mind think again and her sight steady, and she held on to that warmth, that embrace, with all her might and love because she knew that if she did not, it would fade away like an ember in a gust, and when that fire died, she would go to do the dark place. But she could not go to the dark place. Not now, not yet, even if it meant that with the cold and numb gone, she could start feeling the hurt again. Hurt everywhere. On her one remaining arm and its pulped hand, her mangled foot, bruised chest, bruised everything, and broken ears. She was broken everywhere, even more than before, but she was still strong, she knew it now, because Mother never lied, and Mother had never rejected her. With a wheezing breath, she willed herself up with Sapia. A purple aura wreathed her tiny, bleeding body and floated her up, jerking her down every so often as the aura flickered and her mind and mana struggled to keep up. She weakly raised her head up to look back up at that one and the shining warden. Oh. You are coming back, said the warden. All this, for your dear friend. Boring, my dear, quite boring. It would have been far better to your taste for you to have tried running in fear with that broken body of yours. I would dare to say that perhaps your taste has decayed too much for me to enjoy now, but we shall see soon. The warden knew that the demon could no longer hear, so he waved her towards him with eager gestures of his gold-tipped fingers. For now, come, come. Witness as my love blooms once more. And know this, my love, if your taste is unworthy of my palate, this too shall be your fate. Krilla could not hear anything he said, but she knew he was saying something. Telling her she was broken, probably. Worthless. As she inched forwards, the shining man's light grew brighter and brighter, and with it, the memories of pain and hurt came. But this time, she did not look away, even when it was hard. Because she knew now that she was not worthless. It did not matter what the shining man said, what anyone said. All her life, she had doubted whether anyone had wanted her, but that was gone now. She was strong, Mother had said so. She could feel the power starting to swell through her body. She had the power to change this situation in front of her. All she had to do was take the choice to fight. But even knowing she had strength, power, she still wavered as she drew nearer and nearer to the shining man's uncaring form. That light, it reminded her of the hurt, how it had taken control from her and her body. She still made her choice. To fight like she was meant to. Now more than ever, she felt and valued those words from that one. Those words were enough to let her choose. She squinted, bit her lip, held her breath because even a breath at this point took up too much energy, and kept moving forwards, always. Forwards. Still, she was so far away. No, she was not far, she was just a few meters from the Shining Man, his light almost blinding her, but she was just so slow and so hurt. She watched as the Shining Man slammed his hand into that one's back. The Shining Man shuddered in joy before retrieving a blood-slicked arm with a large, beating heart resting atop his flat palm, raising the organ up to the sky and staring at it with utterly enthralled, distracted eyes. Rising panic struck her. Was she too late? No, calm. She remembered her mother's calm. She could still sense that one's life through the remnants of their tether. She moved forward to the Shining Man, turned back as he lifted up his mask to take in blood trickling from the heart down his hands. Go, she told herself. Go. Forwards. The warden squeezed the enormous heart beating in his hand, letting a small stream of deeply red blood hit his wide open and eager mouth. The blood hit his tongue, and the moment it did so, his triumphant smile faded as he dropped the heart and doubled over. Such foul taste, cursed the warden as he spat the blood out in a steaming, heated little puddle. This is not the taste of a night child. What is this? Until finally, Kurla was there, right behind the Shining Man's back, but she had no more strength. Her single arm dangled to the floor as did her legs. She had no strength to drive them up, not physical strength nor magical power. She knew deep down that using this power was dangerous, that it would hurt anywhere she channeled it. But for once in her life, she was free to make her own choice about her body, and she had decided to fight. She closed her eyes and channeled Mother's magic to her head. Black wreaths of magical energy arced and crackled at her forehead, growing her horns out, and then, she struck into the Shining Man's back, closing her eyes tight so she did not see his burning light but instead felt the comfort of the dark. The collector registered severe damage to its physical body. Damage significant enough to hinder its processing capabilities here in this foreign hyperspace nexus. The already blurry images of iridescent rainbow circular planes grew even fuzzier, wrapped up in visual static, and the collector knew that it had to leave. To the collector's own consciousness, time had passed for but a mere second, but the sheer breadth of information needed to process this enormous density of information across the alien hyperspace nexus must have caused even 1 second to feel as long as a minute, perhaps longer, to its physical body. In that single second that the collector spent in this hyperspace nexus, however, though it had not managed to locate the collective, it had still sent out a powerful signal. A signal that would continue to travel across space until it reached the collective, though in what amount of time this would occur, the collector could not begin to calculate with the lack of given information. This was all the collector could do for now. Already, it had spent too much time initiating the signal. Now, it was time to escape. The collector's psionic profile deactivated the first part of the dawning protocol that propelled it into the hyperspace nexus. The many white psionic tethers anchored to the collector's consciousness pulled back like a spooling thread, drawing it into the simulacra again. The hyperspace nexus and its countless converging patterns of circular plans disappeared in warped, light-speckled darkness first. Then the simulacra's environment of white, tendril-like psionic roots reaching out to and connecting a simpler series of rainbow roots emerged again. Closer now in connection to its physical body, the collector could lay out a visual of its physical body through an out-of-body point of view in front of its consciousness. Thus, it witnessed that the opposing humanoid had torn out the collector's heart. The female demon specimen was behind the humanoid, but the collector calculated that at the combat capacity it had witnessed her before possessing and her current injuries, she possessed a 0% chance of affecting the humanoid in any way. The collector understood that without having made immediate contact with the collective, its directive to survive and consume was still in place. It yet possessed the opportunity to grow stronger and devour worthy foes. Thus, it prioritized its survival once more, calculating a means of escape from this predicament. It possessed 2 more hearts, but the loss of the main heart, the main core, involved such a massive immediate loss of magical and physical combat capability that it immediately began searching for an exit point. Psionic tethers wrapped around the collector's consciousness extended outwards, latching onto various roots, and analyzed. Here in the smaller scale simulacra, the collector could analyze and make decisions in the order of 1/10 of a second. Analysis of the possible warp points indicated areas that generally corresponded to points near goblin settlements across 4 realms. The collector fine-tuned the analysis to filter out warp points that were near too many life forms by assessing how many psionic profile signatures clustered around each point. One of these points was near an enormous point of psionic energy, likely a warp temple as the female demon specimen had described prior. The collector filed the location of this area into its memory banks, for it was entirely possible that utilizing the far greater psionic energy of this area would allow for easier analysis of the hyperspace nexus. But for now, the collector could not afford to go anywhere near this point, for it was utterly packed with life forms. The collector would have to immediately enter into a metamorphosis state to heal its wounds, and it required the least amount of interference possible. The area it therefore chose to warp to was still within this realm, but a vast distance away towards the northern hemisphere. Here, the density of life forms was drastically lower than in any of the other warp points. Taking this into account, the collector locked in its warp. Glowing white tendrils on one of the rainbow roots rushed forwards and latched onto the collector, initiating the warp sequence. As the warp began, the collector noted something immensely curious: the disappearance of the powerful humanoid's presence. Chapter 82, Alone. Krulla felt power rush into her horns and out, into the shining man. This was not fully her own power, it came from somewhere else, somewhere very, very strong, but it was still her that channeled it, and she output as much as she could without holding back. When she opened her eyes, she could see the shining man again, except he was dimmer. His light was gone, and his golden wings were turning black. The man stumbled backwards and fell to the ground as his left leg began to disintegrate into nothingness, a flickering edge of shadow traveling up from his leg and devouring his body as it moved, threatening to erase his body utterly out of existence. I am fading away. Disappearing. The warden watched as his leg crumbled away, and then the darkness began to gnaw at this waist. And no. My jailers. My jailers. They will save me, they will heal me. While the sun is still shining. Yes, they will yet save me. With that, the warden flapped his darkening wings of energy, sending his crumbling body away into the transit point leading out of the throne room. This left Krulla alone. She did not know what the warden said, but she knew he had felt fear and that he had run. It made her smile. For so very long, she had been so very afraid of him and all the hurt, thinking he was something so strong and shining and beyond her, but in the end, he was just as scared as she was of the dark place. He was not special. He never had been. None of his words meant anything. She collapsed onto the stone floor. It was cold even though it should have been hot from the shining man's light. Maybe because of the magic. She did not know exactly what it was. Just that it had made her strong for just a second, and that it had given her a choice to fight, and that she had taken it. Oh. Now the cold and numbness was coming back. She lay on her back and watched the ceiling of light crystals again. The ceiling was breaking apart, the sunny light of the crystals fading and flickering as darkness began to creep in. Everything was breaking. Dust and debris and breaking shards of crystals began to fall everywhere as huge cracks started to web around the stone floor, shattering the throne at the center. She turned her sight away from the decay. Things were getting dark and blurry again. She felt cold. Cold and alone. She did not want to go to the dark place. Because there, she would be so alone. Always alone. She wanted warmth. She turned her face to the other side, towards that one, and here, she felt warmth. That one's heart still beat in front of her on the ground where the shining man had dropped it. With a last bit of energy, she crawled up to the heart and hugged it, slumping her tired, heavy head on its warm, gentle beating. The heart beat slower, and her breathing grew slow with it, and she smiled. Mother. Was this her? It felt like her warmth. But now, she was the one holding Mother. Because now, she had proven she was strong enough to be the one holding and taking care of others. I forgive you, said Krulla, her paling lips mouthing the words. Her tongue made no sound, but it would not have made a difference to her deaf ears. She could feel light and warmth radiate around her, and maybe, she thought this was what happened before she went to the dark place. She did not want to be alone there, so she hugged Mother tight. Then, there was cold. She could feel Mother disappearing from her grasp, and the cold filled in the void where warmth once was. No, she did not want to be alone. Not here. Not in the dark place. Then a voice that rang in her head, and even though it was murky, she still knew it came from that one. Had he joined her into the dark place? Suddenly, she felt warmer again, and she opened her eyes. The collector stared down at the female demon specimen. She lay atop a bed of thick snow. Howling winds packed with clusters of ice raged all around, compromising visuals and dropping the temperatures dangerously below the freezing point of water. This was where the collector had warped to. A harsh environment unsuited for its current form that utilized various insect bases that simply could not survive here. It had to metamorphose soon and choose a more appropriate form. Still, this female demon specimen. The collector knelt down by her. "Return my heart to me," said the collector, but the demon could only listlessly look up to it. The severity of her injuries was too much. A lost hand, arm, and foot. Several broken ribs. A lacerated lung. Severe blood loss. Not to mention the harshness of this environment. The blood that pooled out from the female's wounds froze over in seconds. She was soon to expire. Already, she had trouble even perceiving the collector's thoughts. The collector knelt down to her side and took its heart from her hands. This was its main heart. Without it, the collector lost access to any of its magic, rendering it drastically weaker than normal, not to mention the severity of the physical wound itself. It had stemmed life-threatening blood loss by internal manipulation of its muscles and compensation with its two other hearts, but this was not enough. The collector calculated it possessed 2 minutes of activity before it rapidly expired. Yet, the collector attempted an operation. It placed the heart in the cavity it had been torn from, and in doing so, it could feel faint hints of magical energy still tethered from the organ to the rest of its body. Using these small remnants, the collector circulated using sepia minor blood flow to the heart, eventually building that minute flow back up to something strong enough to gain minute access to its magical capabilities again. It rooted the heart in the cavity with makeshift sepia structures, though it determined that any usage of mana for other procedures was liable to sever this delicate operation. Still, the collector put a hand towards the female specimen and attempted a minor circulation of bodily processes through the female daemon's body using its sepia. A faint aura of purple energy transferred between the collector and the specimen, their link easing this process. Blood flow resumed within the specimen. This would not save her, but it might grant her some minute amount of time to potentially explain the usage of the magic she had utilized to defeat the humanoid. The collector had only observed remotely. It had not been consciously there to sense the nature of the power. It only understood that it operated similarly to the aged sorcerer from the tower's magic, his chaos as it were. Though far more powerful. The two could not even begin to be compared in terms of the sheer density of magical energy that went into them. Even now, the collector could sense tiny remnants of that power from around the demon specimen's head. Shadowy black circuits lined themselves across her face, running up her pale skin to fully grown, sharp horns. An oppressively powerful presence emanated from these circuits in an even more overwhelming pressure than what the phosphorescent humanoid could muster. The power had been vastly too much for the daemon's body to handle. Her head was beginning to disintegrate, the edges of her hair and horns flaking away into ash. Cracks began to line her cheeks, reaching into her eyes and making her blind. Regardless, the collector knew that by consuming the demon specimen, it could gain a better understanding of this phenomenon. Taking in her core directly would allow for a greater analysis of what was within, far greater than what the collector had been able to glean from by devouring a hand. The collector reached a clawed finger down to the female daemon's small heart. It had to tear the organ out soon before the disintegration reached it and potentially spread to the collector. The female specimen managed to reach out and hold her remaining hand around the collector's finger in a spurt of energy that should not have been possible by any calculative standards. The collector heard her voice. There you are." The collector stopped. The female demon was too deteriorated to control the output of her emotions through their psionic link, and the collector was too weakened to limit this either. It felt relief from her. Happiness. Then, sadness. "I'm going to the dark place, aren't I?" The collector understood what she meant through the simplified messaging of their psionic link. It did not tear her heart away immediately, even as the disintegration began to spread from her face to her neck. It gave her time. "Yes," said the collector. I don't want to go there. I don't want to be alone." The collector did not respond. "I don't want to go to the dark place. I want to go there. The place you told me about." "You wish to enter the collective?" Yes. That's it. You You told me about it. There is no pain there, right? No. There's no hate. No. Lonely. Will I be alone? No, you will be enshrined within a greatness occupied by many that have been worthy. You will not be alone. In time, I myself will join the greatness of this unity. The specimen smiled, and then grew still. Her hand dropped from the collector's finger. She had expired, her neural functioning nearly completely deteriorated by the disintegration of her brain. Soon enough, the rest of her body would follow. The collector reached into her chest and withdrew her heart. It stood up on its serpentine tail, looking at the tiny little thing slowly stopping its beating in the center of its palm. Raging, ice-filled winds howled around a vast landscape of snowy, barren ice. In the midst of it, there stood alone the collector, staring down at the tiny red dot in its hand as crystals of ice began to clump over it. Chapter 83, High Council Meeting. Winter of 1561 Post-Convergence. In the Guild of Dwarka, one of the major cities of the Sundan Empire. A guild was the haven of any adventurer and a staple in any major city across every single realm. Among the many often vastly different peoples and cultures of the common realms, if there had to be one thing that connected them all, it was the presence of guilds. Large, domed buildings that functioned as training grounds, living quarters, hospices, and, most importantly, information hubs for picking up contracts and reporting them all at once. Ordained and guarded by common law set down by the gods themselves. For the Adventurers' League and its sister organization the Sorcerers' Order were divinely founded and responsible for fending against the calamitous threats of monsters and undead respectively. Constant defense against the world dungeons and their unending spawning of monsters. Constant surveillance against null zones and their tendency to spread the undead curse. Without the League and the Order to face these threats, civilization would have ended long ago. The League and Order therefore transcended the differences between borders. And in the highest point of a certain guild's dome, there stood a meeting room. Carved from stone of a gray and muted shade lined in a bare, austere circular construction. A round table of equally simple stone build circled this room with 7 stone seats surrounding it. This was the meeting room of the High Council comprised of the greatest authorities within the Adventurers' League. Upon the head of each seat, there was carved a single large sigil, each different from the other. On one seat, there was a sigil of a sword to represent the seat of the League Master of the Adventurers' League. On the seat opposite to that one, a sigil marked by a staff denoted a spot reserved for a zenith of the Sorcerer's Order. The rest of the sigils on the seats followed similar dynamics, though they symbolized seats for the representatives of the common realms instead. A sigil of a simple circle for Terra, realm of the humans and their many tribes. A sigil of 3 straight lines for Mercia, realm of the dwarves. A sigil of a tree for Bores, realm of the Fae and elves. A sigil of 3 triangles connected together for Sheen, realm of the feathered Karasi, scaled Yin, and furred Warren. A sigil of a wave crest for Aloe, realm of the mysterious Omekan that are said to swim in a world filled only with water. Once, this sigil would have been marked with a crescent moon for Zeril, realm of the demons and vampires. And finally, separate from the table and carved into a throne of rock that towered over everything else, was a sigil of 7 interlocked rings to represent Etheria, realm of the gods. The throne room was dark, illuminated only by the glowing visages of figures that sat around the round table, each filling their respective seat at the table, though notably, there was no figure seated upon the throne meant for Etheria. At the entrance of this room kneeled a young man. He notably had only but one arm, and that was crossed over his heart in a traditional salute of honor. "We have heard enough," said Ferdiad. He sat upon the League Master's seat. His voice projected outwards in a powerful, stern tone that had the capacity to equally inspire or rouse fear. "Go to the hospice and take some rest. We will discuss this matter among ourselves." "Understood, League Master," said the young man as he nodded, stood up, bowed, then left. A sliding door of stone closed behind him, clicking in shut and sending a crackle of magical energy streaking out throughout the room, preventing any hostile, prying magic from entering. Feriad put a carapaced hand to his sharp chin, the mandibles at the sides of his gaunt face clicking together. He did this from the comfort of his own underground burrow in Forays, but his magical projection in the meeting room mimicked his movements. "You have all heard his testimony," said Ferdiad. "I apologize for calling for you at this odd hour, but my people are active at night, and thus it is in the dark that I favor my work." "I do not mind," said Shaybao, representative of Sheen. He was from the kingdom of Yin, and it showed in his appearance. Tall and lean. dressed in blue, wave-patterned robes that showed he had dressed up for this meeting, even though he was remotely projecting himself just like everyone else. A sheathed blade with a golden tassel lay wrapped to his hip. His face had sharp, angular features. A few blue scales dotted the curve of his forehead. His long, pointed white ears twitched when he spoke, and as his thin lips parted to speak, his sharp, bestial teeth showed themselves. It is only proper that we conduct ourselves to the safety of the common body, and the good of the realms is a duty that we must be prepared for at all hours. Though I see that some of us are not of the same opinion, as always. Shay Bao leered, and the slit pupils of his cyan eyes narrowed first at Lenin, representative of Forays, and then at Sieg, representative of Mercia. He did not even bother to cast a look at the empty seat of Alo. The Omecan people throughout history had always lived in their own realm, and theirs alone had not converged with the others with the dawning of the gods. They did possess their own way to traverse the realms, but none knew the mechanics of it, and they were inherently reckless of people. Thus, the Omecan had been thought mere myth until 20 years ago when the demons and vampires invaded the common realms. It was then that the Omecan had shown themselves to lend their aid, but when the battles were fought and finished, they vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. An honorary seat had been provided for a potential representative of theirs to replace the now disgraced realm of Zeril, but Alo had not offered a representative to take up the seat so far. As for those present, Lenin, in contrast to Shay Bao, was barely dressed at all with the barest of silken undergarments providing the most basic level of decency possible. She rubbed her twinkling golden eyes and yawned, messy curls of blonde hair framing her face and shoulders. Sieg was, well, he was not really here at all. His projection crackled and fizzled in and out of existence. Connection issues, probably. Shay Bao pointed at Sieg. The dwarves are masters of monotech, and yet, he is always the one with connection issues. I am beginning to think perhaps it is a convenient excuse to slip away from his duties. Ferdiad raised his hand, beckoning for silence, and Shay Bao nodded. It is fine. Truthfully speaking, I do not believe this matter worthy of a high council meeting, and normally, it would never have ended up at my notice. But with how unstable the world has been, I have told all the guildmasters to inform me of any potential abnormalities, no matter how small they might seem. You are way too cautious, Bird, said Lenin. She leaned forwards, resting her chin on both hands. Her fairy wings sprouted from behind her, fluttering lazily and showing off the floral patterns dotting their orange, butterfly-like lengths. Sometimes, you should ease up, stress is bad for you. It's no wonder us Fae live longer than you elves do. Buriat ignored Lenin and continued. Now, do all of you consider the young adventurer's testimony believable? Considering, of course, that you have read the Order's reports on the general situation. Lenin crossed her arms and made a pouty face. Ignoring me, huh? Well, I guess I'll contribute. Do I think his story's believable? No way. Duly noted, said Ferdiad. Now, on to more expert opinions minus. Lenin raised her hand up and waved it vigorously. You didn't let me finish. I did read the reports, you know. Ferdiad nodded to her, and she continued. I think his whole story is impossible. A random monster that just gets stronger and stronger by eating things. No limits. Intelligent but no primal density. In a place like the Darkwoods where there's just dirty and creepy weak bugs, no offense to you, Bird, but you see what I mean, right? Come on, whoever has heard of anything like that? We should all know, right? Considering we're all 7 stars at the very least. Right? Right? Chapter 84, Goddess of War. I did consider the vast number of inconsistencies in the boy's testimony, said Ferdiad. Yet, there is no disputing the fact that he is a 4-star adventurer. Before he has even reached the age of 20. As a human, that is exceptional, and his record is clean and impressive. 56 successful hunts. A few of which were a letter grade above his own ranking. The boy may be young, but he knows what he is doing. Then why the holes in his testimony, I must wonder, said Shay Bao. Oh, the poor boy has just lost his mind, methinks, said Lenin. He lost his love and his sister passed from her injuries. Who can blame him for breaking down? I know I could never bring myself to. Her words were warm and compassionate, and yet, the tone of voice had a faint hint of coldness to it that made it clear to everyone in that room that Lenin was still an 8-star adventurer who had killed and faced death countless times. What I think happened is that he picked up the contract for goblins and retrieval of the 1-star party's corpses, said Lenin as she put a finger to her full, deeply red lips. He hit an unbound dungeon, got cocky because he's young and strong, and maybe it warped in something way too much for him to handle. That could happen, right? And to push blame away from himself, he just made up this big and scary monster. If he has lied during his testimony to us, members of the High Council, then he must be executed, said Shay Bao flatly. Oh, no, not that, said Linen. The poor boy must be dealing with so much already. So cruel, so harsh, no, I would vote against that in a heartbeat. Shay Bao scoffed. You let your emotions rule you to this extent. I wonder how you have made it so far in our line of work. Rules are rules. There can be no exceptions. If it is proven his testimony has been falsified, he must be executed for breaching trust, and trust is a precious resource among us adventurers. I will sever his head from his neck myself if I have to. You know, I miss your brother when he used to sit there. Jen always comforted me and laughed with me. Oh, he was so charming, said Linen with a sigh. How did you turn out so different? My brother is a fool, a drunk, a coward to his duties, and a disgrace to the Shay name, said Shay Bao. I am far better suited to this seat than he ever was and will be. Bertiad raised his hand and beckoned for quiet again. We still have not proven his testimony is false. And we must entertain the possibility it is yet true. The boy is not insane. His head is still set square upon his shoulders. In fact, I have not sensed such sharp drive and focused will in a man's eyes in quite some time. He nodded to the seat opposite to him where the Sorcerer's Order representative sat. Mithra, said Ferdiad. Has the second round of investigations returned any more substantial information? Mithra drew in a long puff from an elegantly curved wooden pipe as she looked down to a stack of papers in her hand. She breathed out, forming a neat ring of smoke that faded away when it reached the end of the range for her projection. She looked every bit the quintessential sorcerer. Traditional robes colored a sandy brown to indicate that she was from Utu and green eyes lined with deep, dark bags that too seemed to be a common accessory for sorcerers and their long hours of research. Mithra trailed off for a second before speaking again after gathering her thoughts. The second investigatory team of sorcerers has yielded little more, said Mithra with a soft, bored tone. But that is to be expected. Judica has blocked the area for their own investigations. With their interference, it is quite impossible to perform the necessary scans, sample analyses, and leyline readings. Bertiad clicked his mandibles in irritation. Judica was likely the most powerful city-state in the entirety of Terra, perhaps even the strongest force across all of the common realms. They alone did not have guilds within their city, for each and every one of their citizens were powerful and capable of slaughtering most low-grade monsters with their bare hands. Not to mention the 9 rays whose combined might could rival even the gods. Because of this, the Adventurers League did not hold much leverage over Judica. They would have to ask for permission to investigate the area, and there was no telling what the Holy State would allow. Judica, said Shay Bao in audible disgust. Sun-crazed fanatics, all of them, but I cannot deny their efficiency. Considering their presence, is it not prudent to believe that the cause of this incident of demonic or vampirine origin? Oh, certainly, it is possible, said Mithra as she took in another draught from her pipe. But quite unlikely. There are no more rogue demonic or vampirine entities across the realms, or at the very least, none powerful enough to pose any real threat. With the destruction of Zeril, I should say that those that have not been killed or enslaved hold not even the numbers nor order to form anything resembling an organized state. Mithra cocked her head, thinking as she exhaled, covering her projection in a hazy sheen of smoke. Though I suppose the refugees banding together in New Zeril comes close. Oh, Mithra, you must stop smoking, said Linen. It will wrinkle your pretty face and make your lungs all black and smelly. Mithra smiled faintly. I am a woman of habit. There is nothing to be done about that. But on to New Zeril, though it is located in Terra, I find it improbable they would send any of their kind out. Already, the existence of their state is in constant uncertainty predicated upon the contingency that they do not harm any common life. They cannot risk the common body bearing down on them lest they lose the one final bastion they may call home. Better to have them wiped out. Are they not merely monsters now that they are removed from the common body? Said Shay Bao. They killed millions in the Red Night. They have yet to pay for their sins. My brother might not have been able to raise his blade against them, but I will. Stay on the topic at hand, said Ferdiad, raising his voice slightly, and silence fell into the room again. He sighed. We simply lack information, then. All we have is the adventurer's testimony and reports that detail the traces of an unbound dungeon, and its collapse has probably masked any potential magical traces we could have found to track any abnormal monsters. Not to mention Judica's interference. What are the chances, Ferd? A monster would have to be S-class at the minimum for us to have to step in, and a creature like that in the dark woods of all places," said Lenin. "You must learn to relax. You know, both of us are in forays, and I know my kind only comes out at day and yours comes out at night, but maybe I can see you and help you relax. Oh, the Queen of the Summer Court and the King spending time together, that would be quite the scandal between our peoples." "Yes, and precisely why it shall not be done," said Ferdiad. "We will get nowhere like this. I will make a decision now unless the rest of you wishes to put this up to vote." "I trust in your judgment," said Shay Bao. "I must say I am of the same opinion," said Mithra. "Whatever you want," said Lenin. Ferdiad's inky black eyes blinked, slivers of thin white flesh covering sliding over them as his antennae twitched. Of course they would agree with him. Because he was strong. Because they were strong. This was the problem with a council filled only by the strong. The weakest adventurer here was Mithra at 7 stars, and even then, that was because she did not prioritize work with the League and more her research. Everybody else was 8 stars and above, and all of them had been invited to join the gods in Etheria as ascended, but for one reason or another, whether it be a need to manage a people or personal matters, they had refused. A proper 7-star adventurer was the perfect threshold where those born with incredible natural talent could reach with consistent hard work and wits. Nobody here had truly worked for their power. Every single person here was born with power from the beginning that made them comparable to natural disasters. Because of this, they never learned to work with others. Other people would merely slow them down. They faced death, but trusted only in their own strength to overcome it, and because they were strong, they always did. Ferdiad might have been the only one here that was not born with monstrous power, the only one among them that had ever been in a proper party, and even then, he outgrew his party incredibly quickly once he gained the blessing that made him as strong as he was today. In any case, he still liked to hear other voices. And, perhaps he thought with some amusement, he too had started to value only the opinions of the strong. Then I will take some precautionary measures. An A-rank contract spread across all guilds to find any monster that fits the adventurer's descriptions. Triple coin reward and potential star rank promotion if the monster is killed should be alluring enough, said Ferdiad. No. Ferdiad shivered, as did the rest of the representatives' projections. They all turned simultaneously to the throne. The sigil of interlocked rings glowed a bright red, and from it, a voice projected. Lady Amonarinus, said Ferdiad with bowed head. It was extremely rare for Amonarinus, goddess of war and the highest authority of the Adventurers League, to ever make her presence known. Ferdiad, in his 25 years as League Master, had only ever felt her voice once during the Red Night. It is an honor to have you with us. There will be no contract, said Amonarinus. Her figure did not project, only her voice did. It was calm while holding a rough edge to it that felt like a prelude to an infinitely more dangerous rage simmering just underneath the calm. There will be no mention of this matter outside the boundaries of this space. What of the young adventurer? Said Ferdiad, his head still bowed. He has potential to be a fine warrior yet. I will not dispose of him. And none will believe his words. Understood, said Ferdiad. You work well, and you work often, said Lady Amonarinus to Ferdiad. Ease yourself of this matter. It is mine and mine only now. Chapter 85, The Exile. Kachal, the land of eternal winter where snow that turned flesh to frost and winds that cut like knives reigned supreme regardless of the season. It is said that aside from the undead wastelands of Undir in the southern edges of Terra, Kachal was the most dangerous land of the entire realm. Thus, it was no coincidence that the humans of this land grew strong. Even before the convergence, the humans of this land were a mighty people, their bodies clad in great cords of muscle and their skin grown pale and resistant to the bitter cold. Before the gods, the Fjalan tribes were considered monsters themselves. Humans that never settled in one spot for long, always following the great storm to find fish and water and monsters to survive upon. And in times the great storm grew too small, its vortex of waters and ice too drained, the Fjalans became raiders that brought untold misery when they sought land and food from the weak and sun-kissed peoples to the south of them. Even post-convergence, the Fjalans stayed true to their nature, taking upon them worship of the war goddess and honing their strengths to even greater heights. Even now, when the gods granted the Fjalans the city of Midr to settle upon so that they would no longer have to war and raid and follow always the untold dangers of the ever-moving, ever-cycling great storm, Fjall produced the highest number of strong warriors in proportion to their population. It is said that among adventuring groups that to have a true Fjalan warrior in a party was akin to charging into battle with a ferocious beast, and what better way to best a monster than with an equally fierce and savage monster. Atop a snowy peak of one of many mountains forming the rift, where the air and clouds grew thin and few men ever dared to tread, there lay the dying body of one such fierce and mighty Fjalan warrior, fully marked in the ceremonial tattoos of his people to show that he was honored and worthy even among his own. His muscle-clad barrel chest heaved with croaking breaths on snow-tipped rock as he looked first at the handle of his Everfrost battle axe sticking from his stomach, its spiked tip impaled through his stomach in a fatal wound. Several of the mountain tops around him were shattered from the impacts of a great battle. A battle he had lost. His fading eyes looked up at a dragon. Impossible, he thought again. Dragons were extinct. Leif Gunnarsson knew this. Everyone knew this. He knew it just like anybody who knew anything of the old myths knew. He knew it like how even children knew the sky was blue. It was a fact of life. A simple truth. One that the gods told over 1,000 years ago and the elders continue to tell even now, generations upon generations later. Once, monsters ruled this world, and dragons lorded above even the monsters. Then the gods had emerged, and with the convergence, united the realms and brought an end to the reign of the dragons through the Draconomachy. Every child across all common realms grew up hearing this tale. How the gods ended the dragons and thus started an age not of monsters, but of men to rule the world. But here, beyond the mountains of the rift that divided the territory of Vintar, the northern world dungeon from the lands of men, perhaps it was possible for a survivor, for some bit of the ancient dragons to have survived. Leif had to report this back to the League. It seemed unlikely, but they would believe him. He had 6 stars to his name. All he had to do was get back and tell them of the danger. This monster was strong. Strong beyond measure. It was no ordinary beast that fought with its jaws and claws. It was almost unbelievable, but it knew how to fight. Martial arts. Axe-wielding. All of it, it knew. It adapted to life's own fighting style mid-fight and grew stronger before his eyes with honed, almost beautiful movements. It was as if the monster was trained by the mighty war goddess herself. And it would keep growing and getting stronger if left unchecked. That much, Leif knew as a martial artist himself. He tried moving, but only blood filled his mouth as his own axe pinned him down. The dragon grasped his axe and drove it further down, ensuring he did not move. He slumped back down to the icy ground and stared up at the dragon. Though the draconic being did not entirely look like the dragons of old. Leif looked up at the monster's circular, ghostly white eyes, at the slit black pupils that narrowed at him. Or at the least, he tried his hardest to stare back into those eyes, even as he died and felt his body grow weak, for a true Fjalan never looked away from the eyes of his enemy. The monster's face was utterly inhuman with a sharp, elongated snout encased in white scales. It reminded Leif of the sharks he and his father fished up in the Great Storm, back when he was just a boy. The beast knelt on 2 powerful, thickly muscled lizard-like legs, the feet ending in 3 toes tipped with icy white claws. Though, as Leif knew well, the beast could just as easily move around on all 4s with a raw speed and agility that he had never encountered before. Its face loomed over Leif's, and the creature smiled. Its jaw was proportionally huge on its face and lined with 3 sets of sharp, hooked teeth protruding from thick, pale pink walls of visible gums. And from that utterly monstrous mouth came sounds. And as Leif realized, the monster spoke. It spoke the common tongue. "Name," said the beast, its voice a deep, raspy echo entirely unsuited to vocalizing the common tongue. "Your name." "Leif. Son of Gunnar." Leif coughed, the effort of speaking driving his axe's handle deeper into him and sinking him further into death. But no Fjalan ever shied away from declaring their name when prompted, not by god nor monster. "Leif." "Leif," said the beast, its pronunciation awkward, as if it was still learning the language. "Good name." "Good." The monster nodded at Leif before saying, "You die now." Leif saw as the monster grasped his axe with a massive, scaled and clawed hand, and then twisted the handle and drove it up, smashing it through his ribcage and into his heart. That was the end of Leif Gunnarsson, 6-star adventurer and next in line to be chieftain of the Boar clan. Boltar gazed down at the human he had slain. The human's eyes went wide as his life slipped from him. Boltar took his fingers, retracted the icy claws from their tips, and drew down the human's eyelids to close them. He did not know why the humans did this, but it seemed they liked to do this to their dead. And Boltar had enjoyed fighting this human. Leif. That was his name. Boltar stood up, his slightly hunched, thickly muscled and white scale-plated back bearing all the sturdiness and mass of a fortress wall. You were strong, but you reached the limit of your potential. It is good that you die now, said Boltar in his own tongue to the corpse. He felt several cracks in his scales and a few shallow cuts into his flesh regenerate. 2 blue draconic wings made of pure energy started to flicker and form to his sides. I thought maybe below the rift, everything was strong. The white voice always told us never to go below the rift. I thought it was because of you humans. He looked at the human's dead face. You are fun, but not strong. Unworthy of my curse. Boltar looked ahead, down the mountains of the rift where below the rest of the world sprawled. And soon, this world would face the end. It was ordained by the white voice. And Boltar would be the end's herald. But now was not the time to move. Soon, though, soon. Boltar smiled, all his fangs rattling in anticipation. Oh, how wonderful the end would be. He would get to fight and fight and fight and prove his blessing of destiny wrong. No, not a blessing. Only now that he was strong did the others call it a blessing. It was a curse. The very curse that had made him once an exile among his own. A curse that he would break soon. Boltar turned around to go back to his domain, but then stopped. Oh, I almost forgot, said Boltar. He turned back to the human's corpse and picked the still body up by the axe handle embedded in it. You humans like to bury your dead, too. Like the Jachun. Unfortunately, I do not know your burial customs. Boltar's eyes did not narrow, they physically could not, open in permanent battle-ready wideness as they were. Cold, almost dead eyes. He scanned the endless white landscape beneath him, at the constantly raging, ice-veiled winds and clouds forming a thick layer of violently clashing elements under the mountains. It was impossible to tell where this human came from through all that. All Boltar knew was that he belonged below the rift. Somewhere down there, wherever it was, he did not care too much. Maybe someone of his kin would find him. Maybe not. At the least, it was good to give the body a chance for the fun it had provided. Boltar drew back the axe handle like a javelin, the human corpse pinned to it, and then threw it. A shockwave of force gusted out from his throw, and he saw as the corpse parted a few clouds down below before being swallowed up by the endless winds and snow. Chapter 86, New Hunt, New Evolution. The collector trudged through the snow, struggling to keep its limbs from freezing over and seizing by continuously pumping as much blood as it could into them. Even then, blood from the massive wounds exposing its heart and back trickled patterns of red with each of its heavy steps. The drops of blood froze into red crystals even before they touched the snow. The collector did not waste energy clicking its mandibles, tough it would have if it could. It maximized its senses, attempting to find any reasonable form of shelter in this environment. Winds howled in every direction, pattering snow onto the collector. As if trying to shovel up ice to bury it. Visibility did not extend past 5 meters through the endless walls of whirling ice and snow. Auditory systems were compromised due to the constant background noise from the wind. Tactile systems involving the sensitive hairs also did not work, the hairs freezing over in the temperatures while also trying to contend with intense interference from countless particulates of ice in the wind. What the collector could rely on was thermal imaging with heat sensors in its ocular system, but this yielded nothing of note worth. It had walked for 5 minutes now, but the landscape did not change from this endless wasteland of cold. The collector yet knew that there were life forms here. At the very least, there was a settlement of goblins opposite the direction it currently traveled. This, it would tend to later. Yet the presence of goblins indicated further the presence of wild flora and fauna that could be potentially harmful, though flora seemed far less likely due to the intensively cold temperatures. Survival. This was all the collector thought of now. Whatever emotions it had felt before, with that demon specimen, whatever foreign and unfathomable things those were, it suppressed because survival trumped all else. Once its survival was assured, then it could begin to try and understand them, or if they proved troublesome enough, continue to suppress them. Though, the collector did note with a side thought, it was becoming more difficult to suppress these foreign emotions. Disappointment, for example, had inadvertently leached into the collector's mind when it thought of calling the collective. And with the female specimen's death, it had granted her time to say what she desired. Answered her queries as she faced her mortality. It did not understand why it did so, but it had felt right. But why had it felt right? Something akin to a sign of respect for the service she had granted to it. An extension of the respect it felt when it granted worthy warriors apt deaths, perhaps. Already, Stray wasted mental processes on contemplation. Calibrating back to prioritizing survival. 5 minutes until lack of magical energy would cause loss of control over the Sapia-supported heart, causing immediate death. The collector had no more time. It would have to metamorphose here, out in the open, though it seemed that the harshness of the current weather conditions caused a lack of life forms in the area. Regardless, there was no choice, for finding any form of shelter in this homogeneous landscape seemed improbable. The collector knelt down and dug into the deep snow, using its massive arms to shovel out great chunks. As it did so, it assessed its current directives. Contact the collective. Survive and adapt. Those two in that order. The collector had failed that first directive. Encountering an entirely different hyperspace nexus was an unfathomable phenomenon that it could never have predicted. That alone had stymied its calculations and processing enough to suffer grievous injuries as it did now. The implications were also massive. A hyperspace nexus governed an entire universe's worth of space. What did it mean to encounter a completely new nexus? Did it mean that the collector was in a new universe entirely? If so, then the implications were immense. Not only was it entirely cut off from the collective, it meant that it had obtained the great purpose the collective desired to realize from its inception. Or in amassing the biomass of countless organisms, the collective desired for either a miraculous reversal of entropy itself or a circumvention of inevitable heat death via access to different universes. If this indeed was the case, then, now more than ever the collector had to devise a means to return to the collective for the great purpose had been fulfilled. But the collector knew also that it was equally likely that the collective simply had not processed enough of the Tesseract to understand its true nature. It was possible that the nexus the collector encountered here was not foreign, but a substructure so distant that the collective had not analyzed it. Then it might even be possible that the signal the collector had sent out would still reach the collective. There were an immense number of possibilities and explanations, but the collector knew it could never settle upon any single one, for it simply lacked information. Thus, the collector decided to focus itself upon its simpler second directive. To survive and adapt. To grow strong. Stronger than ever before. Stronger than anything upon this world. It felt desire prickling in its heart with warmth that stood against the cold. Yes, this, the collector would do. There were still many more challenges to encounter in this world. This, the collector knew well from its prior altercation. Many more battles to face and overcome. Many more prime specimen to devour. The collector by this time had dug up enough of a hole in the snow to somewhat conceal its form if it condensed into a ball. It curled up tight, serpentine tail wrapping around the lengths of its body and allowed the raging winds above to bury it in layers of snow. Then, it began its evolution. There was an immense amount of biomass stored within the collector, not to mention various new specimen and samples to consider utilizing. This evolution more so than any before would send the collector to greater heights of power. Yet, still insufficient to defeat that humanoid. The humanoid with the wings of projected energy. But no matter. While that humanoid, if it remained alive, stagnated, the collector would grow and become ever stronger until this world was its own to consume. The collector began its metamorphosis, generating the cocoon's flesh from its carapace pores and encasing itself. The cocoon would have to expand to a significant degree to provide enough of a buffer to ward against the cold, but the collector attempted to minimize visibility by spreading the cocoon underneath the deep snow layer in a flatter, almost pool-like structure. This made the cocoon itself less durable, but also less noticeable. This way, the collector could evolve underneath the snow, its form breaking down into primordial ooze spread thin on the frozen dirt. The snow even formed an insulating layer against the cold above. It did not take long for the winds to fill up the hole the collector had made, and soon, it was as if the collector had never stood on the snow at all, completely hidden under a blanket of white. Now was the time to evolve. To begin a new hunt in a new land with a new form. It checked its status to assess its resources. Metamorphosis level 6. Biomass level 331 hundredths. Stored genetic material. Author's note: I am going to cut down this list now because it takes up too much space. but the full list will be available on the status update page. Frostborn Hobgoblin Thrall, Bineswinger Goblin Champion Core, Flameting Salamander, Windcutter Wildcat, Shockstripe Eel, Shaker Fish, Firefly Shinchu, Lurker, Goblin Lord Core, Goblin Elite. Adaptations. Internal systems. Ultrafiber muscles rank 6.4. Minus coil boosters. Autonomic neuro-bodily matrix. Minus metalloglottic ossifier 5/5. Minus bone binding skull. Minus volcanite. Minus everfrost. Minus abyssium. Minus burial tusks. External systems. Sensitive hairs rank 5.2. Minus quill spray. Organic hyperalloy carapace rank 5.4. Minus Longcane chitinous sublayer. Weapons systems. Monomolecular claws. Rank 4.4. Pyrocatalytic glands rank 3. Current form. Assassin Bugbrute / Demon / Dullscale Rohu Jumping Araka. Magic status. Mana level, 100%. Active cores 3/3. Prime core. Minus trigger, desire. Demon core. Minus trigger, wonder. Frostborn Thrall core. Minus trigger, greed. Inhura. Sapia demon core. Ethera. Devourer prime core. Primal magic. Bone binding Frostborn Thrall core. Blessings. Blessing of Mount Oi. Primal density, 5%. Root consumption limit, 100%. The collector possessed an abundance of resources to weigh and utilize for its next evolution. Already, in terms of sheer biomass it had accumulated already from consuming the 4-star adventurer's weapons, the collector would ascend not just 1, but 2 metamorphosis levels. Prime genetic samples to consider for a new form more suited to this weather. Useful metalloglottic ossifier samples. All of these would make the collector leaps and bounds more powerful than its prior evolution. Yet, there was another power the collector was far more interested in. Before the collector even began to consider bases for its next evolution, it focused on what it had obtained from consuming the female daemon's core. Within the matrix of the evolutionary cocoon, a system that had now melded with the properties of magic inherent in this world, the collector could greater investigate what exactly it was that the female demon specimen had utilized against the humanoid. Previously, by devouring but a sample of the demon, the collector was able to obtain her genetic material and assume the physical form of her species while growing a corresponding core. Indeed, this had been useful, for the female demon specimen did possess prime genetic material, easily reaching the peak of her species to the point where she could have been considered an entirely different and superior subspecies. But that alone did not explain the power she had shown against the humanoid. That power had no record within her genetic record itself. No, that power must not have come from her physical properties, especially in considering that the female specimen did not have the magical energy necessary at the time to utilize that power were she fronting its cost entirely. Likely, the collector hypothesized that power had been hidden directly in her core. Something deeply intertwined with her psionic profile, the soul as she would have called it. In essence, what the new evolutionary system classified as a blessing. Like the blessing of Mount Oi the collector extracted from the red-skinned goblin champion, the collector engaged the system's processing power to extract the blessing hidden within the daemon's core. Chapter 87, Wall of Darkness. The collector's psionic profile floated within the depths of the greater system hosted within it. The system not only stored biomass without changing the collector's physical dimensions or adding to its mass, but it also most importantly stored every single psionic profile of the creatures the collector consumed. The female demon specimen had called psionic profiles souls, and indeed, the collector understood from its stored memories of tinkering civilizations that most of them, when they were in more primitive stages of development, correlated psionic profiles with some part of their active will that stayed beyond the deterioration of their physical forms. Yet, this was incorrect. Psionic profiles that did not have a tether to a physical, living body were merely records. Snapshots of the energies that comprised the mental processes that formulated living beings. No more alive than a tinkerer's image caught in a photograph. No more alive than the genetic memories that they stored within organisms. Complex, yes, but alive. Not. So, there was no way to truly frame what the collector was experiencing in interacting with its stored psionic profiles through the conventional senses, but if it were to be highly simplified down to purely visual representations, then it was as if the collector was traversing through a great sea, a body of water, and here, there were flickers of light that indicated a unique psionic profile. The collector utilized the system's processing power to locate the psionic profile of the female demon specimen. The waters shifted, and the appropriate light came before it. Touching it would lead the collector to an analysis of the specimen's profile. This, the collector did. Yet, results unexpected. Attempting to extract the blessing from the profile caused the collector to abruptly find itself not surrounded by waters, but in the midst of what seemed to be a structure of tinkering architecture. A circular room not unlike the throne room of the Goblin Lord in the dungeon. The collector remained at the very periphery of this area, blocked off by a wall of flickering darkness that obscured every conceivable sense, including psionic analysis, but even then, the collector could perceive the vague shape of a sizable throne through the wall. The collector analyzed this area, for this phenomenon was a completely new one that had never been recorded when attempting to analyze psionic profiles. The area was still analogous to a psionic profile, thus, the collector existed in this space also as a profile, but it was not the profile of the female demon specimen. No, cross-referencing this profile with the many that the collector had consumed determined no match. A potential psionic infiltration. No, there was no hostility from this profile. If there was, the system would have automatically registered it and destroyed it. The profile was not foreign. Its coordinates originated directly from the female demon specimen, likely having inhabited her core, not her body, hence, the collector had not encountered this before. Initially, the collector had thought this potentially similar to the gate system incorporated within the cores and roots of sorcerers it had consumed, for the female demon specimen had showed circuitry that seemed to indicate gate connection. But gate connections were almost purely a physical phenomenon. A tinkerer would alter a portion of their spirit roots so that they were wired only to connect to a foreign energy source. In their case, a gate. The gate itself was not a living being. It was merely a well of energy, but the fact that it was regulated by a higher tinkerer known as a god prevented the collector from utilizing such a power. Not only would the collector never bow to a tinkerer, it was possible that said god could damage the collector from within if it wired any of its roots connected to the gate they managed. Yet, this was different. Assessing the potential threat of this new profile yielded a 0% chance of harm. This psionic space and whatever profile it belonged to was not tethered to any living organism. Thus, much like the countless other profiles the collector stored within itself, this foreign psionic space and its corresponding profile did not possess any true will of its own. It simply existed. The collector could sense that beyond this wall of darkness, the potential to retrieve the blessing lay. But though this profile was untethered, that did not mean it would not respond to psionic stimuli. The 0% threat rating attributed to this profile had the potential to shift if the collector attempted to utilize more processing power to break this wall and interact with whatever was within. Yet, the power the demon specimen had shown was extremely tempting. She wished for the dawning of the collective and had laid down her life for it. If the collector could access this power, then it could grant her wish all the quicker. Some contemplation. Analysis. A decision. The collector withdrew. No more risks. Not now, when survival was so tenuous. This psionic space would always exist within the collector's storage to investigate later, potentially when the collector possessed more information about it. And that was one of the primary resources the collector needed most now. Information. With the loss of the demon female, obtaining a free-flowing and easily maintained source of information would be difficult. Keeping this in mind, the collector tended now to its physical evolution. Firstly, consuming the immense amounts of biomass it had stockpiled. Biomass consumed. Biomass level, 337. Metamorphosis level, 68. With this amount of biomass, the collector could ascend 2 metamorphosis levels. Thus, it could restore 2 of its prior adaptations. Neuroendocrinal matrix rank I restored. Minus chronostasis, utilizing psionic energy to boost neural processes, the perception of time may be slowed for short instants. After 1 second of usage, neural processes must undergo an adjustment period which may cause delayed reactions or warped spatial perception. Neurocirculatory reserves rank I restored. Minus reserve heart I, an additional heart. May be utilized to sustain bodily processes in the case that others are destroyed or compromised in function. Like cornerstones building up a strong foundation, adaptations such as these that enhanced broad bodily and neural functions were prerequisites for developing stronger weapons systems and sub-adaptations. The neuroendocrinal matrix granted the collector greater control of its hormonal system and neural pathways, and with further evolutions, would also allow the collector to unlock the psionic powers it once possessed. Its psionics would never be at the level of a Dominator strain collector, for all of its psionics were geared towards boosting control of its own body to maximize usage of its natural tools. But even so, this was a formidable adaptation. One sub-adaptation, for example, allowed the collector to spread its consciousness throughout its entire body, allowing it to maintain some level of mental processing unless its entire body was destroyed. Coincidentally, this was the crucial ability it had utilized to survive as a grub against the so-called High King of the Gods. The neurocirculatory reserves adaptation would allow the collector to manifest additional crucial organs such as hearts or brains. Though, in the collector's case, culturing additional hearts was far more useful in allowing it to store cores it consumed into the extra organs. Now, to determine what forms it would take, the collector would have to discard every insect base it currently utilized. These specimens, though they could handle the lightless cold of the dark woods, could not even begin to survive in the collector's current biome. The Araka genes, in particular, were highly inefficient here. The hydraulic systems the Araka utilized to move its legs would freeze and compromise. None of the other insectoids from the dark woods would fare much better. The Rohu genes it utilized for aquatic mobility were also inefficient, even though the collector assessed there was a high probability of water-based environments in this location. The Rohu swam in warmer waters. It would not contend with the chilling waters likely to flow here. The demon base the collector currently utilized was quite exceptional, and unlike the other specimen, the genetic material from the demon was exceptional enough that it would continue to get stronger and stronger as the collector itself attained higher metamorphosis levels. However, the demon base also was not entirely efficient for the cold, and there was another specimen that was just as exceptional as it. The firefly Shinchu. This creature's core alone had provided the collector with the biomass to ascend an entire metamorphosis level. No doubt the true creature it sourced from would easily defeat the collector even now. There were two ways the collector could survive this environment. The first was in splicing forms that resisted the cold. The other was to splice forms that could generate enough heat to beat the cold. The collector chose the latter option. Thus, it utilized the firefly Shinchu as a base, for though it was an insectoid, it could produce a heated bioluminescence that could quite comfortably negate the cold. Not to mention its immense capacity to hunt monsters. The firefly Shinchu was an odd specimen. It seemed to not hunt tinkerers unless provoked. Instead, it devoured solely other monsters, specifically monsters with higher primal densities. It seemed to operate as a specimen that regulated the magical biomes of this world, eliminating monsters that grew too old and powerful for their habitats. Thus, the firefly Shinchu had completely adapted itself to monster hunting. Its bioluminescence could be tuned to attract monsters, and it could generate a form of magic that could wreathe its body parts in solid light that caused massive internal damage akin to spontaneous combustion when encountering the bare flesh of monsters. The higher the primal density of the monster, the more severe the internal damage. This ability, the 4-star adventurer had attempted to utilize on the collector. Yet, the collector had not possessed much primal density for the ability to take strong effect. In this environment devoid of humanoid population density, monster hunting capabilities would be incredibly useful. And this power in general would allow the collector to cheat and face off against monsters stronger than itself. Chapter 88, Firefly Shinchu Evolution. Thus, the collector sacrificed the demon base. Though in time, when it exceeded the 10th metamorphosis level, it could go back to genetic material it had sacrificed in creating forms. However, the collector desired to keep the daemon's magical capabilities. It used its extraction point to take an adaptation from a native specimen to maintain the Thel from the demon genes, for Sapia was exceedingly useful and the Thel was required to regulate it. Now for 3 additional forms. The collector chose the Goblin Elite for its superb physical capabilities. The Elite possessed a natural affinity with the ultrafiber musculature adaptation and would grant access to an additional pair of powerful arms. Not only this, but the Elite over time had the ability to adapt to environments. The collector calculated that within the span of 1 week, the Elite genes would develop cold-resistant properties. At a higher metamorphosis level, perhaps the collector would return to the demon form and potentially utilize it to its maximum potential. Then, it chose the Flameting Salamander. The salamander was itself not adapted to the cold, but it could maintain high internal temperatures and then expel them outwards on its skin via a series of external gills to generate a constant layer of flame around its body. This, the salamander utilized to ward off predators on land where it was less mobile than in the water. In the water, it would condense its heat generation on its jaws to superheat them for deadlier bites. The Shinchu's light, if it was used offensively, cost an extraordinary amount of magical energy to maintain. Thus, its reliability as a heat source was fickle after intensive combat. In the case that the collector's mana reserves grew low, it would require a backup source of heat to maintain itself. This would be the flaming salamander. The salamander's aura of flame would only intensify with the Shinchu's light as well, effectively turning the collector into a walking, endless bonfire in the snow whenever the temperatures grew too cold. The collector's blessing of Mount Oi would also allow it to maintain this constant burning even on parts of its body that did not have the salamander's flame-resistant lipid coating. But perhaps the greatest value from the salamander was its regenerative properties. The regeneration did cost mana, but it was still an invaluable resource. With it, so long as the collector survived, something it excelled at doing, it could always maintain its bodily integrity for the next fight. As for the last specimen, the collector focused on obtaining genes that could traverse cold and aquatic biomes, even in the case that the collector could not generate heat and light. There were two powerful aquatic specimens the collector could choose from, the shock stripe eel or the shaker fish. Between these two, the collector chose the shaker fish. It lived in the extreme, cold depths of deep waters, utilizing its vibration-sensitive whiskers to sense prey in zero-visibility environments and utilizing its earth-shaking powers to uncover subterranean prey on the seabed. With its form settled upon, the collector decided upon how to regulate its magical course. It maintained the demon female's core for access to Sapia. For the other two cores, the collector maintained the thrall's bone binding mostly for its shockwave-inducing powers that could amplify with the shaker fish's own abilities. For its newly grown heart, the collector slotted in the Goblin Lord's core, for there was a settlement of goblins nearby. Utilizing the Lord's Dominus-type primal magic to bend them all to the collector's will would hopefully allow it to access more information about this environment and its threats. Now for the mineral samples the collector had procured through its conquest of the Goblin Lord's dungeon. Through the metalloglottic ossifier, the collector could as of now only generate small amounts of the mineral, encasing perhaps part of a single body with each sample at best. The only exception was when the collector swallowed small enough mineral structures whole. These, it stored within itself intact and could retrieve. The collector surveyed its current lineup of samples. Metalloglottic ossifier samples 5/5. Minus crystal skull. Minus volcanite. Minus everfrost. Minus abyssium. Minus burial tusks. The collector utilized all 5 samples. It would manifest the crystal skull in a location upon its body that would make it visible as a potential target for tinkerers to strike, luring them into believing it was a vital area. The burial tusks, it could cap onto the tusks it would naturally grow from assuming elite genes. The abyssium, it would encase upon its thill to significantly enhance its Dominus-type capabilities. Both the volcanite and everfrost, upon analysis, yielded themselves to be ores that could change their molecular structure depending on how mana was flowed into them. Quite similar to the smart steel utilized by tinkering battleships in the United Front, though significantly less flexible and durable. But where these magical ores lacked in sheer tensile durability and shock-absorbent properties, they could made up for with the magical ability to change inherent physical properties about themselves such as their temperature, with the volcanite emitting heat and the everfrost emitting cold when mana flowed through them. Thus, both ores were useful in that they scaled up to whatever entity was utilizing them. An entity with powerful mana reserves would manifest far more impressive effects with the ores than an entity with less impressive ability. Though the collector did calculate there was an upper limit to this. If the collector approximated roughly that star levels indicated mana levels and these increased in similar degrees per additional star among adventurers, then a 6-star adventurer would find either volcanite or everfrost increasingly useless. For now, both ores would serve the collector well. The volcanite, the collector lined across the biotrigger for its pyrocatalytic glands, allowing for any flames that emerged from it to react with the magical ore and enhance itself. Like this, the collector could now focus and extend the range of its flames or supercharge the biotrigger with mana, causing it to create an explosive, wider-range burst of flames around it. The everfrost, the collector would line across the knuckles of its 4 arms, allowing it to generate accelerated glaciation on whatever it struck with its blows. Increasingly, there were entities that could deal with the collector's monomolecular claws, for the weapons were still quite brittle. It did not seem like magic utilizing tinkerers had figured it out against the collector yet, but simply intensifying guards so that the mana defensively covering a body part extended beyond the bare flesh would form an effective barrier against the claws. The claws would tear through any flesh, no matter how strengthened it was, but it would not tear through even a thin layer of condensed mana above the flesh, for that functioned akin to a force field that required brute force, not exceeding sharpness to deal with. In the case that the Tinkerers did manage to catch on, having varied applications of brute force such as the bone-binding shockwaves and now these glaciating punches would prove effective. The collector form, spread thin in a liquid state across its flat cocoon, pulsed once as it decided upon all the tools it would incorporate itself. Now, it was time to splice its decided forms and truly evolve. The evolutionary cocoon swelled and grew as it latched its roots of pulsating pink biomass into the frigid ground. As the collector's form within grew, the cocoon had no choice but to expand upwards, the heat emanating from it and the pressure of its expansion pushing against the many layers of snow above. But under the snow, the collector could at the very least hide its evolutionary cocoon until 85% completion. And for good reason. The sheer breadth of genetic material it spliced together caused this evolution to take nearly 2 hours. In large part, the delay was due to the fact that the collector had to spend time processing the Firefly Shinchu genes, for the original specimen was incredibly powerful, far stronger than what the collector's body could handle now, and thus it had to break it down to match the highest end of what its metamorphosis level could operate with. At the end of its evolutionary metamorphosis, the collector's cocoon formed a sizable, spherical ball of transparent flesh supported by a thick base of clumped tendrils. The snow around it had melted away from the heat emanating from the cocoon's intensive, energy-exhaustive biological processes. But the collector did not remain exposed for long. Within minutes, the collector burst out of the cocoon in its new form. Chapter 89, Goblin Subjugation begins. Its status adjusted, marking the form the collector would utilize to take on this new biome. Metamorphosis level 6-8. Biomass level 330-107/100. Stored genetic material. Frostborn Hobgoblin Thrall Core equipped. Bineswinger Goblin Champion Core. Windcutter. Wildcat. Shockstripe Eel. Lurker. Goblin Lord Core equipped. Adaptations. Internal systems. Ultrafiber muscles rank 6.4 plus 0.2 from Goblin Elite genes. Minus coil boosters. Autonomic neuro-bodily matrix rank 1-3. Minus metalloglottic ossifier 0/5. Minus bone binding skull removed. Minus volcanite removed. Minus everfrost removed. Minus abyssium removed. Minus burial tusks removed. Neuroendocrinal matrix rank 1 new. Minus chronostasis new. By overloading neural networks with latent psionic energy, it is possible to enter into a state of heightened tachypskia, temporarily slowing down the perception of time. Neural networks must require periods of rest in between usages. Neurocirculatory reserves rank 1 new. Minus reserve heart 1 total 4. External systems. Sensitive hairs rank 5.27.6 plus 0.2 from Firefly Shinchu genes, plus 0.2 from Shakerfish genes. Minus quill spray. Organic hyperalloy carapace rank 5.4 greater than 7.6 plus 0.2 from Firefly Shinchu genes. Minus Longcane chitinous sublayer. Weapon systems. Monomolecular claws rank 4.4 greater than 6.6 plus 0.2 from Firefly Shinchu genes. Minus extended growth new. Monomolecular claws may be shaped into extended, scythe or spike-like structures for greater range. Pyrocatalytic glands rank 3 greater than 5.4 plus 0.2 from Firefly Shinchu genes, plus 0.2 from Flameting Salamander genes. Minus instant trigger new, through the evolution of a chemically reactive tubular structure connecting both the pyrocatalytic glands and the biotrigger, there is no longer a delay between the activation of the glands and the emission of flames. Yet, instant activations will compromise accuracy. Native adaptations. Daimonic Thel new. Current form. Firefly Shinchu Goblin Elite Shaker Fish Flameting Salamander. Magic status. Mana level, 100%. Active cores 4/4. Prime core. Minus trigger, desire. Demon core. Minus trigger, wonder. Frostborn Thrall core. Minus trigger, breed. Goblin Lord core new. Minus trigger, superiority. Inhura. Sapia Demon core. Ethera. Devourer Prime core. Primal magic. Bone-binding Frostborn Thrall Core. Ire-calling Goblin Lord Core New. Blessings. Blessing of Mount Oi. Primal density, 5% 20%. Root consumption limit, 100% 0%. The collector's new form was one similar in basic shape to its prior one. It fused together the flaming salamander and shaker fish tails to create a lower body. It utilized the Goblin Elite's upper body and fused it with the Firefly Shinchu's own traits. Yet, beyond that basic shape, there were few similarities. The collector stood at 3 meters tall again, condensing its power. If it simply let its size run amok, then it would have easily surpassed 10 meters, but taking such a massive form would only draw attention. And in principle, a smaller target with higher raw power was far more combat maneuverable than a bulkier, larger body. The collector's head and neck area fused into a wide, hood-like structure of carapace, forming a roof-like space sheltering 5 skulls packed together. 3 skulls at the base of the neck. 2 above them. 1 above them all. A pyramid of cranial structures. This was the Firefly Shinchu's own head structure, an amalgamation of skulls fused together to form one massive network. Though these were not truly skulls. They were carapace and flesh structures fashioned into the shape of them. Their inner structures were not hollow, containing neuromuscular matter, though only one possessed a true brain. Every single skull's eye sockets had glowing yellow compound eyes rolling around within them. However, only one of these skulls contained the collector's brain. One skull glowed with crystal light. This was the adventurer skull, placed at the highest rung of the skull pyramid to seem like an important and easy target while minimizing potential damage to other skulls. A distraction. One of the skulls was that of the Goblin Elites, noticeable by the large tusks jutting from its bare teeth. These teeth were capped with the burial tusk samples. The demonic veil protruded from the back of this skull, the dreadlock of fibrous hair curling around to the front. One of the skulls belonged to the broad, flat head of the shaker fish. 4 sets of brown whiskers drooped from the sides of the skull's head, sensitive to all vibrations. Skeletal fin structures jutted out from the base of the skull. One of the skulls belonged to the flaming salamander. It was flat like that of the shaker fish, but its jaw was elongated. Hazy stripes of red lined its white carapace surface. One of the skulls was that of the Firefly Shinchu, and it looked roughly humanoid, glowing with a faint golden light. The collector's own skull lay nestled at the far end of the skull pyramid's base layer, and it was a completely nondescript humanoid skull of white carapace with nothing special about it. Only a pair of mandibles lining its sides denoted it much. Though, of course, this skull was the most important, for underneath its carapace dome, the collector's brain lay. Beneath this monstrous series of stacked heads, the collector's upper body took much inspiration from the Goblin Elite. It was a muscle-bound, thickly built humanoid shape armored in hyperalloy carapace. 4 arms jutted from the collector's sides, 2 of them capable of unsheathing blades of monomolecular edges from their forearms. All 4 sets of knuckles were encased in crystals of everfrost. Around the collector's neck, where its hood of carapace attached to its shoulders, the flaming salamander's external gills flowed down. These were fiery orange tendrils of flesh that draped down over the collector's back. The tendrils were surrounded by branch-like, feathery red protrusions that flickered like tongues of fire. The collection of gills flowed all the way down to the collector's waist, forming into a structure a tinkerer might mistake for a red, royal cloak. These gills, the collector could utilize to channel the flaming salamander's aura of flames. At the collector's chest, an orb of golden light lay embedded. This was the Firefly Shinchu's bioluminescent organ, and from here, the collector could fire shards of solid light or channel the light to its fists, encasing them in the same light. The carapace at the collector's back was slightly domed, encasing the Firefly Shinchu's wings. Those wings could unfurl into 4 massive structures, the wingspan easily matching the collector's 3-meter length. Above that dome, where the collector's shoulders were, 2 more arms sprouted. These arms were long, spindly, and thin in contrast to the bulky arms of the Goblin Elite. Unlike the rest of the collector, these arms were comprised entirely of black carapace, and they seemed almost stick-like in their thinness. They ended in 3-fingered hands, and these, the collector valued. These were the Firefly Shinchu's limbs. The collector could only manifest 2 of the Shinchu's limbs, but the 2 it did manifest were significantly stronger than even the Goblin Elites despite the contrast in muscle mass and bulk. The arms could extend their lengths to a maximum of 6 meters, but utilizing them costed magical energy that the collector calculated was extensive. Best to save them for surprise attacks or to capitalize on lethal mistakes. The collector's lower body mimicked that of its prior metamorphosis level without much variance. A thickly muscled, serpentine tail fashioned from the shaker fish and the flaming salamander's genes. The tail fins at the end were shaped in a flat, rounded, blob-like structure capable of imparting immense seismic shock if magical energy was imparted into them. With its form decided, the collector shook its body, flinging off primordial genetic ooze from the evolutionary cocoon off its body. The flesh of the cocoon rapidly dissolved, steaming away into a gaseous state that ensured no trace of it remained. The collector felt powerful. Far more powerful than it ever had physically. However, mana-wise, it had to consume creatures to build up its root count. The collector could skip metamorphosis levels, but its root count could not match the same growth. It could only increase in approximation to one metamorphosis level at a time. Thus, the collector had only 60% of the mana pool it should have had in this state. It would have to rectify this discrepancy by consuming mana-dense creatures. The light from the collector's chest orb glowed. This magical organ would make any monster hunt quite easy. A squelching, cracking sound echoed in the howling winds as a thin line split down vertically from the center of the collector's neck to its waist. Then, in an instant, that line expanded, revealing the collector's innards. From that hole, a huge mass of sharp teeth and crushing muscle emerged, promising to ensnare, crush, and grind up any specimen caught in its bounds. Almost as soon as the mass of teeth and flesh emerged, it sunk back into the collector's stomach, the slit across its body closing in an instant. This, too, was part of the firefly Shinchu's biology. The Shinchu did not possess a mouth at its head. Instead, it possessed a detachable, extendable maw at its thorax, which to the collector was its upper stomach and chest areas. Another method of surprising and devouring prey. The collector possessed more tools than it ever had before, and it would use them to grow to higher heights. To become stronger and stronger as it desired until nothing in this world could ever stand to challenge it. For now, the collector headed its way to the goblin settlement, prioritizing information and eager to test its new Dominus-type magic. Chapter 90, Higher Calling. The collector moved through the snow for about 50 meters before rapid buildup of ice crystals began to line every seam of its hyperalloy carapace. The compromise to its movements was not marked, merely calculated at approximately a 5% loss of optimal mobility, but if the collector ever stopped moving to break the formations of ice, then this percentage would continuously increase. This was a test on the collector's part to sense how long it could maintain itself in this environment without its new adaptations. Several calculations assessed that with the flaming salamander's naturally high internal temperatures complemented by efficient blood flow and some level of insulation from hyperalloy carapace indicated that the collector would never fully expire to the cold, but it was entirely possible that if it was immobilized that it could find itself encased in ice in a hibernating state. In other words, the collector could not afford to hold back on utilizing its heat-based adaptations. The collector began to emanate a faint golden light from the orb on its chest. The orb emitted a shimmering aura as bands of golden light began to flicker all around it, expanding outwards and wrapping the collector almost in a full halo of bioluminescence. The collector regulated this light so that it would not be strongly visible past 5 meters in the extreme weather conditions of raging, snow-packed winds around it. Then, to compensate for lowered heat output from the light, it activated the external gills from the flaming salamander. The tendrils of red frilled flesh drooping down from the collector's back lit up in a flash. All the feathery frills spontaneously ignited, and all their fires merged with each other, forming a swirling pillar of flame. The collector's hyperalloy carapace was coated in a magical lipid layer from the flaming salamander that provided long-lasting fuel for the flames, and soon, the fires spread from the collector's back to all around its entire body. Thus, the collector became a walking mass of fire, each tongue of flame further given support by the firefly Shinchu's light. Zero compromise now to its mobility. There was no real mana upkeep to this aura of flame. The salamander's pyrophilic lipid layer constantly regenerated. There was only an initial 10% cost of activation. Mana level, 190%. The collector slithered forwards, and as it did so, it left a trail of steaming, melted water that quickly froze over again once it left. The snow all around the collector melted into droplets of water before they even touched it, and when the miniature rain grew too close to the flames, it fizzled away into steam. Surrounded and wreathed by a constant cloak of flames that danced and raged with the flow of wild winds, the collector looked intensely unnatural. Intensely threatening. An anomaly of nature. Fire where only ice was supposed to reign. Heat where only cold had grasped dominion over. And, strangely, perhaps in a sense of surreal comfort, a lone light where the veil of ever-present snow robbed all of their sight. This would compromise its stealth to a degree, and yet, the Collector had understood this risk. This area had drastically lower population density of tinkering life forms, and the Collector could not afford to take a form that was less than combat optimized as it began to hunt for stronger and stronger life forms to amass its own might. The Collector traveled for the better part of an hour. This land was vast and largely homogeneous. A constant snowscape, though it seemed the harsh weather conditions did lessen as the Collector neared the coordinates of the Goblin settlement. Visibility thus grew to approximately 50 meters, though it seemed that though the intensity of the snowfall and the winds had dropped dramatically here, there was still enough to prevent completely unobscured ocular system functions. Almost 25 minutes to the Goblin settlement. Though, as the Collector's main skull clicked its mandibles, an oddity had emerged. As the Collector traversed through the night and the winds of winter, certain specimens began to float around it. These specimens were small and numerous and at first notice, could easily have been mistaken for snowflakes. However, they were quite large, perhaps the size of an average human's hand, and they hovered in a distinct orbit around the Collector, circling around its aura of light and fire. Approximately 10 of them. An additional specimen circled the Collector every 10 minutes. The Collector had analyzed their physical dimensions and found that conventional senses yielded little information about them. They possessed almost imperceptibly low mass. They glowed a faint shade of blue that differentiated them from snowfall, but otherwise, visually, they were highly similar. The light itself did not seem to emanate from any bioluminescent organ, nor was it a byproduct of any heat-producing reaction. These creatures were entirely magical in nature. Focusing magical energy on the ocular systems of one of the 5 skulls linked to the Collector's nervous system showed as much. The Collector clicked the mandibles on its main skull. It would have asked the female demon specimen what this was, and likely, she would have known. But she had long since faded away, though still, some shard of her was immortalized in the collective. It was up to the Collector to investigate in this unknown environment all that which it did not know. Swiping with physical attacks did nothing to the creatures. The Collector did not like to utilize monomolecular claws in this environment, for the risk of freezing rendered them even more brittle, but it tried so, swiping at one blue snowflake with its monomolecular arm blade. The blade sliced through the snowflake, splitting it in half, but it simply reformed a moment later. Quite similar in principle to the hobgoblin thralls in tangibility, but far more advanced. They were impossible even to consume, for they seemed to hold no tangible form to devour and break down despite possessing a modicum of mass. Quite interesting. The Collector could sense that there was some minute form of life in these creatures, but they were likely nearly brainless, completely devoid of higher thinking and acting like automata to certain stimuli. To what stimuli, however? This, the Collector hypothesized, was the heat or light it generated. Then what would the consequences be of these specimens orbiting the Collector? It did not take too long to find out. Soon, when the Collector was 10 minutes from the Goblin settlement, one of the blue snowflakes surrounding the Collector detached from its orbit, floating away into the distance. Minutes later, the snowflake came back, and following it was a frostborn hobgoblin. A male specimen. Thoroughly deteriorated in condition. Even with his white, cold-resistant skin, he shivered, holding his arms together in an inefficient gesture to preserve warmth. Fire. Fire, said the hobgoblin as he narrowed his blue eyes, reaching an eager hand out to the bonfire rising in the distance, rising through the snow. He did not want to let go of this warmth, not when he had been lost so long in the storm. But he knew the Elder's teachings. Follow the snow sprites, and they lead you to warmth. He smiled as he reached out to the fire in the distance. A big fire, it looked like. Maybe it was a camp. There were no humans here. Maybe it was a camp meant to search for him. But the fire moved towards him. Fast. His eyes widened and he trembled, frozen in fear as the fire grew great and large before his eyes, and through the curtain of fire, the glowing yellow eye sockets of 6 skulls stared down at him. The Collector pointed at the frostborn hobgoblin. The hobgoblin was utterly frozen in fear, but even if it had run, it would have never been able to escape the Collector. Do not move, said the Collector, an echo underlining its voice as it channeled the Goblin Lord's primal magic. Higher calling, it was called. The capacity to imbue the projected voice with magic that completely controlled the mental processes of goblins. All it took was for any goblin specimen to hear the collector's command once, and they would be under the collector's permanent bidding. The hobgoblin stopped moving, even shivering, and just stared blankly ahead. "What are these specimens?" said the collector as it pointed with one of its 4 arms to the many blue snowflakes dancing around it. "They are snow sprites," said the hobgoblin simply. "Too much like an automaton. For the specimen to operate more effectively, it had to possess more of its own will. Perhaps this could be adjusted." The collector made the necessary fine-tuning to the output of mana it utilized for higher calling and commanded the hobgoblin once more. "Tell me what these specimens do," asked the collector again. The hobgoblin nodded and knelt in the snow, his white-skinned figure lit up by the aura of flames raging from the collector standing in front of him. "Lord," said the hobgoblin in acknowledgement. "Snow sprites lead to warmth. Help us when we get lost. Elder always says to follow them when we get lost. I lost. Is there a way to destroy these specimens?" The collector opened a fiery palm up, and a snow sprite landed upon it, seemingly enjoying the flaming heat while being unaffected by it. I not know," said the hobgoblin with a fearful quiver of his lip. "Only Elder knows stuff like that." "An elder, you say?" The collector mused at the possibilities. Elder denoted a title signifying age and, likely, knowledge. Yes, this elder would prove useful under the collector's command. The entire goblin settlement would. But there was simply the matter of securing the settlement completely, to place them all under the collector's dominion with no chance for fleeing stragglers. "Do you hold any position of significance in your social group?" asked the collector. Higher calling seemed to possess some similarities with psionic communication, simplifying the collector's words into intent that the hobgoblin could understand. "I am strong warrior. Went out to hunt frost bear. Got lost. Many looking for me, I think." The hobgoblin nodded to himself. "Yes, I am important. Will they listen to your words?" "Your commands," said the collector. "Most," said the hobgoblin. "Champion, no, he won't listen to me. Beat me instead if I tell him what to do." The collector's main skull clicked its mandibles. It formulated a plan. "That is sufficient information. You will inform me of the numbers in your social group, the dimensions of their settlement, and their orientation as we move. Go home now. To warmth," said the hobgoblin with hope in his eyes as he stared at the collector with nothing but admiration where once before there had been nothing but fear. One pair of the collector's eyes shone down on the goblin. "Yes," said the collector.